Hello, I haven't updated in a while. This is the university radio studio, and I have my own radio show, which is quite cool. It's called The Science Show, and I'm doing really well. And people have been asking how I've been doing, and I feel great, fantastic. Lots of energy, still having great scans, which is good news, and I'm feeling better all the time. So I've made a few adaptations to my diet, mainly just being really, really consistent, focusing a lot on my sleep, mental health, going outside more, spending a lot of time in the sunshine. Even though I'm inside at the moment, I make sure I take lots of breaks. Meditation, been focusing on that more. Less dependence on exogenous ketones. I take them occasionally. I specifically look at my electrolytes. I noticed that one of the main benefits I was having when I was taking exogenous ketones regularly had nothing to do with the ketones. It was to do with the salts that are in them. So that electrolyte homeostasis in the brain is extremely important with traumatic brain injury and epilepsy, which is the two main things that I'm actually attempting to not resolve, because you can't resolve the underlying issues completely, but to manage and to maintain that homeostasis that keeps me on a nice balance. And I find that that is the most important thing to manage, that the electrolyte balance. I guess you could say the sodium and potassium is like the current that the neurons are kind of bathed in, you could say, kind of like seawater. How it's good if it's, you expect it to be very salty, and then the calcium is excitatory, so you want the right ratio of calcium to magnesium, because magnesium is inhibitory of those action potentials, and that's why anti-epileptic medications are mostly calcium channel blockers. So it's blocking the actual channels that are allowing calcium into the cell, because you don't want that hyperexcitability. So when you're blocking those receptors, you're regulating that action at the synapse in that gap, that kind of gap between the synapses of the neurons. So yeah, it's regulating that flow of electricity, if you like. And yeah, it's just a wiring problem in the brain. So it's kind of like I've got an exposed wire, and you either want less electricity going through that wiring, that faulty wiring, or you want to somehow put kind of like a protective factor against that exposed area, because it's very sensitive. So the increase in GABA that you get on a ketogenic diet is, I would say, that protective, that kind of protective measure, and then it's kind of calming down all the activity. It's just it alters brain chemistry in a very favourable way. And then you have that electrolyte balance, which is just as important, if not more important in many ways, on the ketogenic diet, and even if you're not on a ketogenic diet, to regulate those discharges, I guess you could say, that dysregulation of ions that we see in epilepsy, that you don't see in the normal brain, that needs to be managed to control seizure activity. So your seizure threshold is largely dependent upon your electrolyte homeostasis. So I've been managing my. I haven't been taking too much magnesium because I was actually taking too much at one point. I take it sublingually, so it's very quick acting, very bioavailable. There's lots of blood vessels under the tongue, so it's immediately it immediately gets to the brain and central nervous system. So magnesium is central nervous system depressant, and it calms down that activity of the action potentials, but you don't want it too calm. You don't want that inhibitory effect to be too inhibitory, because what you then get, what I experienced, is you get this kind of like a dozy effect. Magnesium's good for sleep, of course, and this is why. Because it just calms everything down, and your whole central nervous system gets calmed down. And I developed peripheral neuropathy because of it. So I was getting tingles in my extremities. I was getting facial paresthesia, lots of problems. And I felt like I was going to pass out a lot of the time. So I developed what's called hypermagnesemia. So I was actually getting too much magnesium, which we often say, oh, that's not a problem because we're so deficient in magnesium anyway that you'll just, it's not a problem, and any excess you'll just excrete. And I can tell you that that's not always true, and it's also that ratio. So if you're taking more magnesium, you might need to take more calcium. It depends. It's that ratio. It's anything can be too much, of course, and anything can be too little, and they're all dependent upon each other. So it's those ratios that we need to be aware of. So yeah, that's kind of my message for the day. Don't take too much magnesium. Magnesium is obviously very important, but maybe get it more from diet. So now I try to get my magnesium from 100% cacao, which I try not to take too much of, but I take just a few squares a day, and I find that it's very beneficial for me. So in many ways, actually. It also has caffeine in it, but not too much caffeine that's a problem for me. And my sleep is very good at the moment, and I'm exercising, which is fantastic, because exercise can be a problem for me, but I need to manage it very carefully, and I feel like I've got it down to a fine art, but that makes me sound kind of I don't know, it makes me sound a bit silly, but yeah, I think I've got it now, which is good. And as I say, I'm feeling good, and my brain feels like it's working at optimal capacity for the moment. And I feel good, so thanks very much for all your support. And I will see you soon, hopefully on this radio show. I've got a radio show now. So yeah, it's called The Science Show. And I don't know what else to say, but things are really good. And I've got a bod pod assessment soon, so I may or may not share my body composition measures, because they're quite interesting, and I'm going to do a few labs, so yeah, stay tuned.